Welcome to this last video in Unit 5 and also the last video of my audio live mixing basic training course. So this last video is about 3 stages of a transparent mix. So at this point I explained you a lot about acoustics basics. I explained you a lot about the equipment we use, like different types of microphone, different types of speakers, what cables we use. I explained to you the whole signal processing pipeline, and now it's and before also in the last unit number 4 we did how to organize an event, how to do a sound check, and now in this video we will go through what can you pay attention to in a mix. There is a concept called the 3 levels or the 3 stages of a transparent mix. So these 3 levels are the 3 stages are basically the levels. So everywhere where you change the level of a channel, the frequencies and the effects. If the levels is set wrong, you should not start changing like frequencies in equalizers. If frequencies are set wrong, there is no point in using effects. Like that's just like this pyramid here should show what is most important, what is second most important, what is third most important. So always start with levels and then go up the pyramid. So let's go into that stage number 1. The levels, they really do have the highest impact on the mix. They decide whether you can hear something in the mix or you can't. The human here, I explained that also earlier in the course, can always hear the signal with the highest level. So whatever, like at one frequency, you can always hear just one instrument playing. So make sure the levels are set correctly, such that the you can hear the instruments well, especially also with compressing. If compressing is done wrong, instruments and vocals just disappear and appear in the mix and you cannot hear them well. I also always follow one principle when it comes to levels. Everything that is done on stage should be audible in the room. For me this means when I see the drummer playing the cymbals very fine and soft, I still should be able to hear that in the room. That happened often to me, that the drummer is doing things and people cannot hear it in the audience. Also, if you have like a lot of vocals, if you have backing vocals, I've experienced it a lot that only the lead vocal could be heard but no backing vocals. So they were somewhere disappeared in the mix. So always make sure everything which is done on stage is somehow hearable in the room. Then third, know the songs. This is really important. Learn the songs, know how the bands want the songs to be transferred to the audience. If you don't know the songs, you cannot set the levels correctly. So train the songs such that you during mixing always know how the song has to sound exactly. So every part of the song, do know what instruments are important, how should it sound, what's the goal of that part of the song, which should be transported to the audience. So here is just a list of a few things I experienced in the past you should probably also know about, and a few things you can pay attention to. So one thing I always try to make sure is that the level of the drum and the bass are balanced. So I try to set them such that they harmonize well with each other. Kick and snare, I normally do approximately the same. I put them at approximately the same level. And then number 3 here, voices are the most important part in the mix. For me, and also or general for humans, voices is the thing we connect to the best. So the voices is always the most important thing in a mix. So I would call this float. Try to float the voices on top of the whole mix. So put the instruments on the basses and then let the voices float on that mix. So I always make sure the voices are a little bit louder than the rest of the mix. What you can also try is to keep faders at unit or 0 position. That's especially important during the sound check. You can try to make sure to end up with the fader somewhere at unity position. This just allows you to set the levels more accurately, as you can set the level the most accurate around unity position. create an atmosphere, use the dynamic of the song, and mix accordingly. That's probably my most important point. As sound guys, our goal is not to just create a mix and the people can understand and hear what happens. Our goal actually is to create an atmosphere in the room, and we really have a lot of tools to do that. So depending on the event, you want to create a different atmosphere, but the goal is that there is an emotional connection between the music and the people in the audience, and the only way to achieve this is if you do a good mix. If you don't do a good mix, this atmosphere cannot be created. So try to find the sweet spot, like of levels. I think levels play definitely a big role here. Try to find that sweet spots for all the channels. Do also here proper compressing is really important. If you don't compress vocals properly, they will be too loud, they will be too quiet at some points, and the atmosphere is basically destroyed. So try to create this atmosphere such that the emotions go over to the people. And here this is also connected to that atmosphere we want to create, is make sure your mix doesn't break down. That means especially if there is songs where there's a lot of dynamic, where they like build and then break down, even when they break down, they will still continue with some instruments playing softer and more quiet. Probably in my case, often the acoustic guitar and the piano, they basically lead through the whole song, often at the places where I mix. So always be aware that where the breakdowns happen, that you can basically catch the song with this instrument which lead through the song. So don't lose the song during the progression through the song. Basically, always make sure there is a certain level, a certain basis level, such that the people don't think, what is happening now, did they stop the song or whatever. So that's really important. Make sure to not let the mix break down. So in more quiet parts of the song, pay attention to the instruments which fill these gaps in the breakdown. Compression, I would say most important compression is for the vocals. This is like a priority list. So vocals definitely need compression, drum also, then next probably bass. Acoustic guitar, I always do some compression. Also electric guitar, you could do some compression. So try to like prioritize that. Always do it for at least the first three here, I would say. Make sure that you can also set the attack times and the ratios properly for all these channels. Without the compression, you cannot control the mix. There will be like up and downs. Vocals will dive into the mix and come out of the mix again, and also the instruments. So if you don't do compression, you will just have like a lot of issues to deal with, a lot of level issues. Basically, you will be also much more using the faders to get the instruments sticking out of the mix. So make sure the compression is done properly. Don't compress, however, too much. That's really important. Never compress too much. If you compress too much, you can hear something like a pumping. I call it pumping sound. I'm not sure if this is proper English, but if it sounds like the vocal hits a wall when the vocal sings louder, it doesn't sound natural anymore. It sounds like it hits something, or it is abruptly, like suddenly it is stopped. So then you might be compressing too much. Normally I compress like 6 to 12 dB, something around that. And if you go over 12, it might be too much of compression. Also with the noise gates is a really important and cool tool to use. However, don't just put randomly noise gates to every channel. There can also come up issues with noise gates. So always think about, why do I want to use a noise gate? And then use it such that it really helps to improve the mix. Especially for drums, I would say noise gates are pretty important to remove audio bleed from other drum parts. So their noise gates definitely help a lot. But also for other instruments, I also normally or often use it to do quick fixes. We've had it often that somehow the piano or also the electric guitar is just having some little noise we could not get rid of. So I normally try that to add a gate basically just for if the instrument is not playing, that this noise is not going through. So this is also how I sometimes use a gate. However, always make sure you don't put the threshold of the gate too high, because if you do that, especially like for electrics or piano, they could like lie a very quiet pad or a very quiet sound on the electric, and then it could just be close by the gate, and this is what we not want. So always think about how to use the gate and why you want to use it. So now we go over to stage number 2. Stage number 2 is frequencies. So instrument has to sound good in the mix, not if played alone. That's probably one important thing to consider here. We always that basically goes into compensating frequencies for other instruments. I also explained that in other videos. An instrument, if played alone, you would probably EQ it differently than you EQ it in the mix. So it's sometimes not big of a thing when the instrument doesn't sound perfectly anymore, but because sometimes you really just have to compensate for other instruments so that other instruments stick out of the mix at certain frequency ranges better. Especially at highs, I always make sure I turn down a little bit the keys and also the acoustic guitar on like 1 to 5 kilohertz, such that the vocals stick out a little bit better at that point. That's always just really fine adjustments. I don't do big EQ changes there. So that's probably point number 3 here. Don't do extreme EQ changes. Whenever you have to do that, there might be another issue, like an issue with the instrument or with the microphone, or something, like almost always something with the signal source basically. Yeah, also keep frequency ranges for instrument in mind. Always try to remember where is the sweet spots, which ranges are not important for the instruments. Try to remove these non-important ranges and try to push probably the sweet spots a little bit. Yeah, good equalizing means tidied up and clean mix. Yeah, that's really like that summarizes all a bit. I would say try to equalize such that not too many instruments are in the same frequency range. So if that's the case, you get a really muddy and undefined mix. So what you want is really to keep it clean and to remove or turn down frequency ranges at the instruments where they're not of importance. And that's how you get to a mix how you want it. Also here I have a list of a few principles which I experienced, so I just decided to share this one with you. Maybe it will help you as a sound engineer. So first one is think about sweet spots of different instruments. I mentioned that now a few times already. Try to first turn down frequency before pushing them. That's another one I always do. I always try to first think about which frequency ranges I want to remove from the instrument. So I'm more on the removing side and not on the pushing side. So yeah, I think that's definitely more important to remove stuff you don't want than to push sweet spots. Generally push with high bandwidth and pull down with small bandwidth. So that's basically when you see a specific frequency which doesn't sound good for that instrument, you don't have to pull it or turn it down with a high bandwidth. However, when you want to push a sweet spot, it's mostly not just one specific frequency, it's mostly a big range. So you push with a higher bandwidth and pull with a lower bandwidth. Set low cut wherever possible. Yeah, I actually do low cut almost everywhere except probably kick drum and bass guitar. I think on almost all the other instruments and vocals, definitely vocals, you can do a low cut. If you have to do an extreme setting, it's often the case that there is a wrong microphone position or an issue with the instrument or the channel. Yeah, that's that I said too before. Try to first sort out the issue at the signal source and don't try to fix it with the EQ. Check settings with EQ bypass always. So that's basically more a thing for the sound check. Always first quickly bypass the equalizer to hear how the natural sound of the instrument is. If an instrument or a voice can't be heard in the mix, often not the instrument or the voice has to be turned up but the signal from a different instrument or voice has to be turned down in a specific frequency range. So that's again compensation for other instruments or voices. That was stage number 2. We now transfer to stage number 3, which is effects. There is a ton of effects available on the market. Here I talk about 2. This is reverb and delay. This is the effects I use the most. I will also mention a third one at the end, but reverb and delay is definitely the effects you will use the most as a sound engineer. So without a reverb, your mix might sound dry. With a reverb, you can artificially build a room. It imitates distance from the listener to the vocal. So when you don't do reverb, the vocal seems like for the listener, the vocal is like in front of his face. But if you use reverb, the room artificially grows and the vocal seems further away. So sometimes you want, or most often you want to have this effect a little bit, so you use reverb. You can, as I said, you can build an artificial room. It also makes the instruments sound fuller. However, what we have to be aware of, that there is a danger that the sound image becomes muddier because we vanish basically the sound of the instrument or the vocal a little bit. So we should not overdo it with reverb, of course. Edit effect return with the EQ. That's also an important part. At the channel where there is the effect return, I normally do high cut and low cut a little bit. I normally just want the effect like above 100 or 150 hertz up to, I don't know, 10k hertz probably. So I remove everything below and above. I normally use short reverb for ambience, like drums. I normally use like short drum reverbs to just create a little bit more of a room for the drum, especially snare and probably kick drum or toms. No, probably not kick drum, more drum, toms and snare. I create long reverbs, and with long I mean like 2.5 seconds, probably 3 seconds for vocals. I normally also use 2 different reverbs for vocal, a shorter one and a longer one. And I normally put the longer reverb on the lead vocal and the shorter on the backing vocals. But that's a lot of taste here. So maybe your taste or the taste of the band is different, so you might want to do it different. Then next, use a pre-delay such that the voices can be understood better. So if you use reverb for the vocals, try to use a pre-delay also. With the pre-delay, basically the start where the reverb happens after a word is sung by the vocal will be delayed a little bit. And this way you can split reverb and the actual voice. And in this way people can understand the voice of the singer better. So that's a little trick I always use for vocals. Next effect is the delay. So the delay should be used, targeted and controlled. In many songs the delay characterizes the songs too. So this is also why you should learn the songs, basically to see where do they use delays and where can I maybe use them the same to get the song as original, like over to the audience as original as possible. Delays like create also, or they basically also give more room to the signals, but without vanishing the sound of the signal. So at the, like the reverb also creates or builds a room, but you also vanish the signal. A delay just repeats some words, or like some words from the vocals, for instance. So you also give that signal, like that voice, more space, more room in the mix. However, it doesn't vanish the mix, or it doesn't make it muddy. Yes, I think delays, they really suit well for solo vocals, but not always. The delay should just be used targeted at certain points in the song. You shouldn't just put it in always. Also very important, use tap tempo to set delay times. The delay times should really be according to the tempo of the song. If they're not, the delays will be offbeat and that will not sound nice. There is one parameter in the delays also. This is called feedback time. I think most of the delay plugins or delays have it. So always try to set the feedback time basically is the number of echoes you can hear from the delay. And always try to set that to a good position. I normally use like 2 or 3 repetitions I think the feedback time itself, I think it's a time or probably a percentage you can set. So always also make sure this parameter is set correctly. Then I quickly go into modulation effects. There is really literally thousands of different plugins or effects you could use. However, these three I also used in the past, like chorus, flanger, and harmonizer. I think modulation effects can be used and they could be nice, but I think you just have to play around with it, try it out, and look how you can get it working and if you can optimize the sound image. Don't just use effects because you think it's fun. Always try to think about, does it really support the mix? Does it make it better or not? And yeah, you have to plan in a lot of time to find the perfect settings for delays, but actually for all different effects like modulation effects and other effects too. Yeah, so this is the effects I could recommend. Of course, there's lots of other things you can just try out. So also here I now have an additional list of things I normally try to consider when I do mixing. So that's not about effects anymore, but that basically, this list basically tries to like close up the whole training, this unit, but actually the whole training a little bit. That's just a few points which came to my mind I experienced in the past. So like what you can do is that if the sound on stage is too loud, or basically, yeah, okay, with this point I just want to mention again that if the stage sound is too loud, it can mess up your mix because it could leak into the room and people would hear the stage sound instead of the sound you mix out of the PA. So make sure the stage sound is quiet. Try to put bass amps and guitar amps backstage if possible. Always stay calm also if everything goes wrong. So in every career of a sound engineer, many things go wrong, things don't work, there's issues, there's problems. So always try to stay calm and communicate to the band what the issue is, how long it might take to find you. That's really important, that the band always knows like if they have to wait for you or what they must be doing or what you are doing. So always communicate if something happens, if something is not working. Never underestimate the importance of monitoring. Also another important thing, try to always take time to get the monitoring of the band right, because if the band member cannot hear themselves playing, they cannot do proper sound and they will send bad sound to your console. Get rid of defect cables or mark them clearly as defect. That's also an issue I experienced a lot, that the cable is defect. Just quickly exchange it because there is not a lot of time, and the defect cable just goes into or basically it's just merged with the other cables again at the end of the event, and the same thing happens at the next event again. So make sure you either throw it away or mark it clearly so that it can be fixed later. At the end of every event, think what was good and what needs improvement. Also talk with the band leader what could be optimized. This is also an important thing if you want to improve yourself from event to event. Always talk quickly, 1 minute, 2 minutes, if needed longer, with the band leader after the event to just get some feedback. Also how the teamwork was, how the event was, and what both could be, what you or the band could do different for next event. Also always provide information of changes to other sound guys in the team. So this is basically a point I had in my teams, because at the place I did sound engineering, I had a whole team of all the engineers. It was recurring events. So if this is the case at your location, you should always make sure every team member gets the information of changes you do on the system, maybe in the standard settings of your console, or also in like working procedure with the band. Then 2 last points. I have never been really talking a lot about panning. Stereo imaging is a pretty cool thing, and I would highly recommend you to do it. So especially for the drums, put the toms, pan them to left and right, pan the hi-hat, pan the overheads, of course. Also, if you have multiple guitars, pan them a little bit. Pan also the voices, like the backing vocals. That's really cool, but just don't overdo it. So don't do extreme panning settings, because in a room most of the people won't have a stereo image. They are sitting either at the left or the right side, and most of the people hear only one side of the PA. So it's just, the panning is cool, but it will just be for a few people in the middle. If you have multiple acoustic guitars, what you can do is delay one by 20 milliseconds. It's a pretty cool trick I sometimes do, because I had the issue that if both guitars are playing, the sound waves just overlap too much and you cannot really differentiate between the two guitars. So what I then normally do is 20 milliseconds delay on one of the guitars, so the sound waves separate a bit and we can hear both in the mix. So that was just an incomplete list of things, of additional things which came to my mind you could pay attention to when you do mixing. So this is basically now also the end of this video. This is the end of the unit and the end of the course. So I'm happy you followed me through this whole course. I hope I could help you to understand the basics, to get into audio engineering, into sound engineering, and yeah, I hope I could help you to get a better mixer. Thank you for watching the videos, for doing this course, this training with me.